welcome to our conversation about the fall of Assad, the Syrian dictator. We're going to be talking about the courageous legacy of Marie Colvin in Syria. She was murdered by Assad's forces in 2012. Now, our center here at Stony Brook is named in honor of her extraordinary work giving voice to the voiceless. And we're very privileged to have Marie's sister, Cat Colvin, here with us. She's a great humanitarian and founder of the Center for International Reporting, and who I should add, sounds just like Marie. And we've also got photographer Paul Conroy, Marie's friend and colleague, who was injured in Homs, Syria, when Marie was killed. And it's a testimony to his dedication and bravery that he's joining us from Odessa in Ukraine, where he's been doing outstanding work. And there is no finer record of Marie Colvin's work and her last days in Syria than Paul's documentary, Under the Wire. So thank you both for joining us. And this is a day I don't think many of us thought we'd see so soon. So, Kat, let me start with you. How did you feel when suddenly one town after another in Syria was falling to the rebels, and suddenly Assad was on the brink?
It was just incredible. I was so thrilled. Wanted to call Paul right away, of course, because I was sure he was feeling the same way. Stunned. It was such a quick progress of that offensive, just 11 days or so, and feeling vindicated. I think it'll be difficult to bring Assad to justice, but just absolutely thrilled that he was ousted.
And Paul, when Homs fell, there must have been so many thoughts racing through your mind.
Well, I had a bit of a battle, my own battle going on, because in Odessa we get power cuts every 4 hours. So I was on my phone getting the news, the rebels are advancing, the power would go out, and it'd be 4 hours before I could get another bit of news. And it seemed like every time the power came back on, the rebels had taken another town.
Yeah.
Like, pardon? So when, Aleppo, Hama, but when they started to get towards Homs, that's when I really, really started to get the sense that, oh my God, could this happen? There's been quite a lot of false dawns really over the years with Syria. We keep thinking maybe, but then they get suppressed again. But I'm just ecstatic, to see the Syrian people have this moment as it is, the whole country going. I couldn't be happier.
So, Kat, I see you beaming. This is at one point, it seemed as if Assad was going to be welcomed back into the sort of community of nations, having been an outcast, and now he's a war criminal on the run.
Such a turn of events. Yeah, just recently, being welcomed back into neighboring countries, and I was just so disappointed and horrified. But I really never expected this, and I'm just so impressed at the planning that went into it, the hope that was maintained over these 13 long years of war, and the brilliant timing. I mean, it was just an incredible chain of events that happened.
Yeah, and Paul,
absolutely elated.
Yeah, I can really see that, and I think we're all having some hope now for justice for Marie. I mean, Paul, you suffered alongside Marie. You were very seriously wounded by when the media center. I call it a media center. It was really you describe it. Tell us what happened in Homs back in 2012.
We got getting into Homs was a battle in itself. We got through Syria. We crossed illegally into Syria. Then took us 3 days to get near Homs. But then to actually get into Homs, which was surrounded in a ring of steel by the Assad forces, and they were just shelling the place into rubble. And the only way we could get in was to kind of go through a 3-mile underground sewer pipe, storm drain, kind of concrete pipe to get in. And when we did finally get in with the Free Syrian Army, we just kind of popped up into, it was like coming into hell. You know, both Marie and I have been in Libya the year before in the siege of Misrata, so we knew what Shelling was like. We knew what it was like to be under bombardment. But this was just another level. This was just 25,000 civilians in this tiny neighborhood, and the artillery all day would just start at one end, work its way down, shell everything in its path, then start again and work its way back down and shell everything. And in the middle of that, there are these civilians in the middle of like wide area battlefield weapons in an urban environment. It was just deadly. And, you know, it was really difficult to report, because every time you left the building, it could be your last time. And it got to the point where it was so bad that we knew we wouldn't be able to get a piece out for the paper. I think it was a Thursday or a Friday. So we decided to do the broadcasts on Channel 4, BBC, and then the one that's most remembered with Anderson Cooper on CNN, where Marie described the death of the little baby. We went to sleep in the back room about midnight, got up at 5, and then there were 2 huge explosions about 50 meters either side of the media center. And there was like a 30-second gap, and then another 2 explosions, this time a lot closer. And I understood what they were doing is the artillery unit were walking the shells in, and kind of I knew that in the next 30 seconds we were going to take some hits. And sure enough, the shells started hitting the media center, and it was chaos. You know, it was just people scrabbling, because everyone was sleeping on the floor. It was a room full of about 15, 20 people, all coming to life at once. And then Marie and Remy got to the door, and a shell landed and killed them instantly. And I was kind of caught in that blast as well. Kind of put a big hole in my leg, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that was Remy Ilshik, actually, the
right, yeah.
photographer who was killed as well as Marie, who we also mourn. And I mean, then I remember I was at the Sunday Times at the time, that just the struggle to, both the shock at the newspaper at Marie's death, and also the struggle to then bring her body out of Syria. It was just very traumatic. But Cat, I want to turn to you, because what Paul was describing was the deliberate targeting of this this building that was serving as an informal media center for a small group of incredibly hardy and brave journalists. And you have spent years since Marie's death documenting evidence that Assad's forces, the Assad regime ordered her death. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we were able to, and a lot of it, inspired by Paul describing the bracketing. It was very obvious to Paul from the outset that she'd been targeted. And so chased that down with, the help of Scott Gilmore, who was at the time working for the Center of Justice and Accountability, and my ex-law firm, Sherman and Sterling, gave enormous support to find, discover documents, witnesses, people putting their lives at risk to smuggle documents out. And we were really able to prove beyond any doubt that the orders came directly from the office of the president, testimony from people who were either aware or even involved. And, I think that would not have been sort of lawyer's revenge. Marie would definitely, if the roles had been reversed, that wouldn't have been her approach.
But you're a lawyer, so that you did what you should. Yes.
One really important aspect of it, and this ouster of murderous tyrant who murdered Marie, I really do hope that there'll be a criminal trial someday. Obviously, that wasn't something that I, as an individual, could start, but we have amassed thousands of pages of evidence. They've all been translated. They're all public. And that was a really important part of the lawsuit for me, that we preserve that evidence, collect and preserve it, so that someday, hopefully, he'll truly be brought to justice.
Yeah, I mean, Assad is hiding out in Moscow at the moment, looking pretty pathetic for a hideous
Yeah,
world.
he was never going to make a last stand in Damascus.
No, and winter in Moscow, I've heard, is not that favorite place to be. So
yeah, well, but I can't say I feel too sorry for him. But you know, Kat, do you think there might be more evidence to come, maybe in the Syrian archives that may well be opened?
imagine, I mean, just seeing what they're going through in the prisons that they're, you know, freeing people from. But sadly, you know, a lot of families are not finding their loved ones, but combing through the records and the images, it looks like they've kept pretty careful records. Well, we know they have.
The thing to remember is that when the Berlin Wall fell, a lot of the East German Stasi went to Syria, and a lot of the Muhakhbarat and the intelligence agencies are modeled on the Stasi from East Germany.
Wow,
and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were incredible record keepers. The Stasi documented everything, and if they've carried that over to the regime, you know, and I have seen stuff, you know, some of the stuff that came out indicates that they really did keep records. So, you know, as long as that is preserved intact, and it seems to be that they are going about trying to keep the government agencies intact, then, you know, there should be, I think, a lot of evidence waiting to come out, you know, of a lot of crimes, not just this one.
Yeah, Kat, how do you feel about that? Because actually, one of the things that was so brilliant, speaking as a journalist myself, about Marie is that she held tyrants accountable by her reporting. And one of the sad effects of her death was this chilling effect that it had on journalism. It was as if, I mean, after she died, it was very hard to get any foreign correspondence into Syria. I mean, no newspaper wanted to send them there because they were afraid for their safety. I mean, it marked a whole era of journalists being deliberately targeted by evil regimes. And so that, how do you feel seeing that,
you know,
even now coming to an end?
Even before Syria, journalists were being targeted. I mean, Marie in Sri Lanka, you know, losing her eye, she had jumped up and yelled "journalist." To me, that was a turning point. And prior to that, it was, you were considered neutral and not targeted. But one of the things we did discover in the lawsuit is that killing journalists was part of their war strategy. Now, Marie's death got so much attention, especially globally. But she always respected and, you know, felt a lot of empathy for the local reporters, and they didn't stop at least trying to report from Syria. You know, unlike Marie, they couldn't get out, and well, in this case, Marie couldn't either, but, you know, get out of the war zone. And I just, you know, I think the attention that was given Marie, of course, as her sister, and given her accomplishments as a journalist, it was so well deserved, and I understand it. But there were so many thousands and thousands of Syrians just, you know, tortured, murdered. Marie wasn't alone, and I feel an enormous empathy for people who are, you know, searching for their loved ones now, or who lost loved ones under this regime. And I'm very hopeful that all of that will come out, you know, and as I said, he'll be punished for these atrocities.
So, Paul, you knew many of the people in Homs who carried on in the worst possible circumstances. It must be amazing now to see some of their voices come to the fore.
Yeah, it really is. I was saying before, I just got a message from a mate who's working out there from Sky News, and he said he's at the house where it happened, and, you know, there are people there. He said, "Don't worry, they remember you and they're waiting for you." But these are people who, you know, that was 13. They've been through 13 years of ducking and diving and hiding and moving and being displaced, but they stayed at it, you know, and that takes takes incredible commitment. You know, there were options. You know, they could have fled the country. They could have come out as refugees and got asylum somewhere, but they stayed, and they stayed report. And you know, that really can't. That's hard to imagine. You know, I mean, we go in for a month or two at a time, 13 years doing it, keeping at it while you're being hunted. You know, while the regime are looking for you, and you know, if you're caught, you know, we came across journalists, cameramen, photographers who the regime would catch them and just gouge their eyes out.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that was the punishment for having a camera in Al-Qasir and Homs at the time. So, you know, the pressure and the systematic hunting them like dogs for 13 years, but they're still there. You know, what can you say to that?
Yeah. Now, tell us about your plans to return, actually, Paul.
Well, I mean, obviously, immediately this started happening. You know, when we made the documentary Under the Wire, it was left in a very dark place. You know, it was left me kind of coming out of this tunnel into a war zone still. And that was it. You know, that's as far as we could take it because it was ongoing. So now with liberty, with freedom, you know, I was immediately onto the director, Chris, and he said, I was calling you at the time. And I'm saying we have to do it. So the idea is to go back to Homs, go the route we went, and meet and look and find the people who got me out, who got Edith out, who got Whale, our translator, out, and find the people who looked after us. You know, I was blown up. I had holes all over me, but they kept by me. They fed me. They tended me wounds. They put me in the tunnel. They got me home. They got me safe. And hopefully I've been able to tell their story as well as I can over the years. But now I think I want to go back and meet them and say thank you for what you did for us. And you know, maybe it's not very often you get a chance to make a film about a conflict and then a film about a conflict with a happy ending.
Absolutely. And Cat, I know you want to go to Syria as well.
I really do. I mean, the outpouring and the support from the Syrian people here in the US, but also messages getting through, and even the care they took with, you know, Marie's body, protecting her and moving her around, and finally, you know, getting her body out. But the support for my family at such a horrible time was just incredible. And I, you know, one of the most thrilling parts of this, you know, overthrow is the jubilation in the streets. And I am just so hopeful that there's a path forward for peace and freedom. And I'm getting more confident as the days go by. And it just seems like a very positive early signs that we may really have a free and peaceful Syria. And I cannot wait to go back. I've had, you know, invitations, hoping to see homes rebuilt and beautiful the way it used to be, the way that people have described it to me. Never been before. I'm really very high on my bucket list.
Oh yeah, yes. Well, I mean, you and Paul should definitely be there together at some point.
We'd love to do a long weekend in Homs there.
Yeah, but this feeling of liberation, of this thaw, the return of Western correspondents now. I mean, Marie's biographer, Lindsay Hilsum, just arrived in Damascus. Clarissa Ward at CNN, who's been a distinguished Colvin lecturer here at Stony Brook. They're all in Syria now. And but let's, you know, if we row back a bit, Paul, Marie was in Syria reporting on, she'd been reporting for about a year on the Arab Spring.
Yeah, I think we'd spent the best part of a year. Yeah, I think it was March we went into Libya, and then we covered Benghazi. Then we kind of, as is our wont, we got ourselves into another siege, into the siege of Misrata, and spent a couple of months in Misrata, and we covered the death of Gaddafi. And, to be honest, we were only home about 2 weeks after that. And then I'm getting all these, Paul, get onto the picture desk. We need to go to Syria. And they were like, have a holiday. And we're going, oh, we can't. So yeah,
I was back in the office at the Sunday Times as an editor, seeing your incredible pictures and Marie's reporting coming in. And honestly, as Cat, as you mentioned, she'd already given so much. She'd been injured in her eye. She'd already lost an eye. And yet some of her finest reporting came in that year, didn't it, Paul?
Yeah.
Including in Homs.
Yeah.
And she was planning to scale it back and sail more, less time in war zones, more time on the water, and then the Arab Spring.
I've been planning to scale it back since I was grown up, and I'm in Odessa.
Yeah. I mean, you've been in Ukraine almost nonstop, haven't you, Paul?
Yeah, since March 22.
Yeah. I mean,
been out here.
You and Marie just had this compulsion. You still have it to tell these stories, don't you?
I was banned by lots of people from going anywhere near a war zone again. And then I kind of sneaked back. I was like, oh, I could go and do some training, which I was doing. I did actually train Ukrainian journalists in hostile environments, surviving the front lines. But everyone was like, do you need cameras and body armor to train people? And I'm like, well, just in case. Yeah. Jumped in my car, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah. So and Cat, Marie was your big sister. I know you admired her so much, but your heart must have been in your mouth so many times when she told you she was off on another adventure.
I would say my mom's heart was, my mom was just constantly worried and terrified about Marie. I was not, because to me, she was invincible. I really never doubted that she could get out of any situation. So I didn't even believe it when I heard she was killed. I was waiting to get a call from Marie saying, no, they got it all wrong. And I really couldn't believe it. Because she'd gotten out of so many life-threatening situations, and always just came to come out with great stories around the table and great reporting. And I didn't live in fear. I lived more to can't wait to talk to her again.
So, I mean, some of those stories from Homs, Paul, about the widow's basement and others.
I think the widow's basement was possibly one of the finest pieces she ever wrote. It really just caught that moment in time, and you could see it when she was there interviewing. I was getting shots, and you could just see there was a fire in her eyes and in her heart when she was writing. And I knew she was gonna kill it. And I think that was probably the last piece, if my memory serves me right. I think that was the last piece we ever got out.
It was really one of those pieces that made you weep reading it, because it was a story of the women who sheltering at the most inhospitable place.
Yeah. It was all the women who'd lost their husbands and their fathers, and and they were just in it. And it almost seems like there's a word of safety in the basement, but that place was no safer than anywhere. If a shell had hit, it was over. But there were about 200 of them huddled into this old woodworking workshop. And there was a woman with a baby 10 days old. She had no breast milk, and all they had to feed it on was sugar and water. And this was, this is.
Yeah, I think I think with her last piece, Paul, it really was the essence of what Marie's reporting was about. It's what we tell our students to make sure they cover. It's the untold stories. It's the stories told by people who get forgotten in wars.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was saying about, honestly, Marie wouldn't have known if we'd been attacked by a MiG or a Spitfire. She wouldn't have. She'd have been like, "Oh, it goes bang," and that was it. I remember one day in Libya, we were on the front line, and there were like Grad rockets screaming overhead, And I go, don't worry, they'll miss us. And she goes, oh, if I hear one coming, I'm just going to run. And I was like,
Where?
pardon? I was like, pardon? She goes, yeah, I'll just, I'll hear it and I'll run. And I was like, the thing's traveling. And I'm saying, she's going, you mean I can't just hear the one and run? And I'm going,
outrun a missile.
How the hell have you lived this long? She was appalled. She was like, why did you tell me that? And I'm like, I think it's important to know that you're not as fast as a rocket.
Yeah, well, I always loved Marie's reporting for the humanity within it. And I have to say, at one point, I was based in Washington. She was based, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, places where, the real stuff was happening while I dealt with the politics back in DC. And every now and then I'd be asked to do some giant graphic, which the Sunday Times specialized in, with, missile coming in here.
Yes, I know them.
You've seen them, right? Big double page spread, troops moving up here.
Big arrows.
How do I know? Because I love Marie's style of reporting. I loved
the one where when after it had all happened, the Sunday Times did a great graphic about my escape, and it was like silhouettes of people with a guy on a rope put me into the tunnel. And that's can you imagine the graphics guys? Okay, we need 2 guys holding a rope with a man on the end and putting them in the tunnel. They must have been sitting going, what story is this?
Yeah, well, honestly, huge respect for the Sunday Times graphic guys who are absolutely brilliant. But just, I was the worst person to ask about, where to station all this stuff and coming and outgoing. And I think, so I recognize that Marie was even more like that. And, but, her stories had so much heart. And I think that's what we really want to remember. How do you think?
And Sarah, I just wanted to jump in there because the other thing about the widow's basement story that struck me then, and I think is so important, it just summarized the horror of the war. They were so obviously not combatants.
Yes,
it really brought home, or at least she was trying to bring home, the horror and the injustice. And Marie always thought she could write, if she could only write better, people would care, they would notice, and maybe some action would be taken. I think that was such a huge motivation for her. And I just wish she could see this, these days now. But she cared, so much about writing in a way that people could relate to and understand. And I think that widow's basement story was one of her best.
Well, she understood that we had one chance a week to bring home the reality of war to people sitting at the table Sunday morning, glass of orange juice, cross on, and that was the one chance she got to explain and to make people feel and understand what war was about. And having bodies squirted everywhere or aircraft, it was just a way of going, this is it. And it was a way that people could sit there. And it was just such a well-crafted way of bringing humanity into what is often seen as, when people start to tire of war, it's like, the war, because the individual faces are lost. And to make people understand that, you have to go, hang on, these are people like you and me. Right. Like everyone sitting around this table.
And they just want to be sitting around a table reading their paper. They're just regular people who don't expect a bomb to be exploding, in their living room.
So, and that was just such it wasn't, there was no accident why that happened. That she knew that it was one chance every week to explain this to people in a way, because everyone's got a grandma, everyone's got kids, everyone's got a brother, a cousin. It was so relatable the way she did it.
I think she really helped to change the face of foreign reporting by her example. And I think that's one reason why, we really do honor her legacy here at Stony Brook. But, at one point, things looked pretty bleak and despairing for Syrians. it's been 12 years since Marie lost her life in Homs. And, I was beginning to despair of change. And yet here we are. Now, this is we are all smiling. We're all really, so proud of Marie and so hopeful for the future. But Paul, you've seen countries that have a moment of liberation, then turn back into civil war. How hopeful are you that things might be different in Syria?
I think I'm really quite hopeful because the Syrians have had 54 years of this. They've finally thrown off the chains of the Assad regime. They've had Russia, Iran, they've had Hezbollah, all holding up this kind of crumbling dictator. But the people up in Idlib who the main rebel advance, they do have questions in their past, but they have, by pragmatism, brought a certain degree of order and lawfulness to Idlib, because they realized the Syrian people do not want to topple one dictator and replace it with some theocracy or some other dictatorship. I think them 20 million people Syrians who've lived through this are not going to welcome in any hardline authoritarian extremism. They've learned, when they went on the streets 12, 13 years ago, they weren't calling for Sharia law. They weren't calling for anything other than democratic change to the constitution, and a right to live like normal civilized people. If anybody gets ideas of bringing in strict Salafist rule or extreme religious dogma, then I think the Syrian people will reject it. But I think the people who've come down from the north, from Idlib, know that. Until they started moderating and easing their outlook, they were getting nowhere. The only way they managed to get the confidence of the people in Idlib, where it started, was to moderate. And I think it'd be a foolish person who upset the Syrian people again, because they know what to do now, and they haven't got Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah backing them. They haven't got the regime. They now have to satisfy the needs and wants of the Syrian people.
And they've seen what's happened, other countries coming out of Arab Spring, where governments were overthrown only to be replaced by another authoritarian ruler, or chaos and fractured, non-functioning countries, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Yemen. And, think that decade of being able to observe what not to do, and also administering Idlib, just the experience of providing services to people. And I'm also really heartened that there seem to be planning to leave the bureaucracy in place. I know bureaucracy doesn't sound like a good thing, but it's a very stabilizing.
Well, I was in Baghdad in 2003 when Baghdad fell, and that was, if you're ever going to learn anything, it's like you look at what they did to Iraq and what was allowed and what was promoted in Iraq, the dissolution of the party, the police, the military, chaos was sown there, and it was a deliberate policy, and the results we're seeing time and time again down the years. They've looked at that as well, and they're not doing that, touch wood.
Yeah, we are seeing great powers getting involved, though, aren't we, Kat? We're seeing
bombing by Israel. I mean, unprovoked attacks, taking out Syria's navy. But I actually hope the U.S. will at least begin working on lifting the sanctions, because I don't see the path forward would be very difficult with sanctions in place, just to rebuild their economy. And I'm with Paul. I really believe that the Syrian people have been extremely clear about what they want, and that's peace and freedom and a normal life. And part of that is rebuilding their economy.
Yes, and I think you're right that already, the West is having to look again at, how to categorize the emerging leader of the new
Yeah.
Syria, who had been called a terrorist, but seems to be saying all the right things.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
including
I
that
mean,
he
that's it.
turned
They are pragmatic. They've
Yeah.
learned that in Idlib. They tried to be and it didn't work. And it's only when they backed off and thought, hang on, what do they want, that they actually started to gain traction. And so that they're not idiots.
And
If they
all
want,
of us haven't changed since we're in our 20s.
Yeah.
People also mature, individuals, I mean, leadership.
Yes, so that's what we have to hope. And also, I think when the Arab Spring kind of broke out, this was a moment of liberation for countries that had been under the heel of dictators for a long time, but because they were so brutally governed, there was no successor regime in place.
when you look in Libya at 42 years or 46 years, Gaddafi, when Gaddafi fell, there was no trace or sign of civic infrastructure or institutions. They didn't exist. It ran from Gaddafi to the top, and there was no structure to preserve. And so they had that hurdle. Syria has a structure. It's completely different from Libya. So if they can preserve, maintain, and improve that structure that's in place, they stand a chance. Whereas the Libyans, it went from Gaddafi to nothing, and that was it went from Gaddafi to a massive vacuum where people were going, okay, I'd love to govern the country, but I have no idea how we do this, because Gaddafi never encouraged infrastructure or governance or committees. It was a hard start for them.
So, I mean, I remember Marie's reporting from Libya at the time, and it was the whole country was collapsing. But Cat, she always had a lot of faith in the people of Syria.
Yes, absolutely. And I think she was just so inspired by how Arab Spring began in Libya, and the outpouring and just the cries for freedom were, I mean, Paul, you were there, I'm embarrassed to even speak about it with Paul on the line. I'm just watching it on TV, but Marie, I think, was just so inspired by that emotion.
Yeah, and she went back. She was determined. I remember at one point people were saying, "Come on, pull out, Marie. It's too dangerous."
Pull out.
Always the wrong thing to say to me.
I remember we used to get the calls like, "We've got to go. One more story." We'd always find one more story, and then the road's blocked. Oh, we'd love to pull out, but
now whenever
when I would visit her when she was in college, she'd make up lies to my mom. Oh, she twisted her ankle. She can't come home yet.
Okay,
A lifetime of practice.
I remember we were in the media center. We'd gone back into Baba Amra without telling anyone. We'd sneak back in. We'd gone out and then we went back in, and we were sitting there one evening, and Skype starts going. And it's Sean Ryan, the foreign editor.
I was just thinking of him.
And it's like, it's pictures up on the screen. And I'm going, right, Sean. And she's going, tell him I'm not in. Yeah. And I'm like, what, Marie's just popped the shop, Sean.
Yes.
Shell to hell. And
Down
then
the
Sean and
bomb
we're
road.
both going, oh no, do we answer this? And she goes, tell him I'm not here. And
I've actually seen her, witnessed her make the little noise in the phone. Can't hear you. What?
No.
Always a great excuse for all correspondence. Yes.
Still use it.
Yeah. So I of course, whenever war breaks out or freedom, as in Syria, I always think, oh, Marie would want to be there.
Yeah.
And so of course, we've all been thinking of her so much in recent days, because we're missing her reporting so much on this chapter.
The very fact that I'm still in Odessa is, if she was here now, I'd be kind of on some weird form of transport that I didn't know existed on my way to Syria, going, oh, well, I guess this is what we do.
She called you the boatman once, didn't you? Because of the way that you make it happen. Anyway, but that said, Paul, you are in Ukraine, which is a country that's suffering so much at the moment from the Russian invasion. And we all know Marie would have been there as well, covering what's been going on and the suffering of the Ukrainians. How are they reacting to what's happening in Syria and what looks like a bloody nose for Vladimir Putin?
Obviously, any bad news for Putin is seen here as good news. But look, the people here are just exhausted with this war. It's just so many of the wars we cover are short and very nasty and very brutal. This one is long and very, very, very painful. I lived in Kherson for 8 months, and that was every day, barrage of artillery in the civilian areas. And, Odessa, we get hit by swarms of drones and ballistics, massive, huge ballistic missiles fired into the city center. And you put up with it for so long, but the people are exhausted now. As I said, any sign that something's gone wrong for Russia is a good sign. But, they need the continued support and the reassurance, because there's a big fear about what the new year will bring and what the change in administration will bring. So added to the exhaustion, you've now got another layer of insecurity. They are nervous about what the new year will bring. I'm nervous. We're anyone who's been here a long time, we don't know. The military commanders at the front, they need to know if they've got shells or rockets or air defense missiles for next month.
Yeah.
And once the military are unsure, life's difficult enough. There are periods when there's times of plenty, when the munitions come through, and you see when the times of few, because the Russians make big gains and advances, and the inability of the military to predict what will be happening in 2, 3, 4 months is not good.
It's very draining.
It's no consolation or benefit to Ukraine, but their resilience and how hard they've fought Russia certainly benefited Syria. That's why they were able to make such quick advance.
I think there was a little bit of drone assistance might have gone on as well.
Yes, the Ukrainians helped out, I gather. Yeah. Yes. So yes, we're living in a world of regional rivalries, of great power rivalries, and a lot of it is the price is being paid by Ukraine, and for a long time was paid by the Syrian people. But there is hope, because we've seen how fast and how peacefully this Tyrant's regime has collapsed. And
the big question is, all the tyrants run to Moscow.
Yes.
Where will Putin run to when his turn comes, which it inevitably will?
Yes.
Either that, or he's getting old too. That's my hope for justice for Assad.
The Russians keep them buggers going. They
they'll live forever. They'll just prop them up.
Remember Brezhnev and all of that? They'd be like, is he?
Is he alive?
Yeah. Well, yes. So let's celebrate Syria's liberation today. Hope for the future. And God willing, inshallah, we may all be in Syria.
Inshallah.
I will.
Right.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Cat Colvin, Marie Colvin's sister. Thank you for all you do.
Oh, thank you for having
me. And Paul, thank you for joining us from Ukraine.
Absolute pleasure.
And I really hope your your second documentary, the second chapter of this story, your return to Homs and to where you and Marie were together when she died. I just think that's going to be
Good
amazing.
working title, Return to Homes.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, both of you, for
Take care. Thanks for having us here. Thanks for putting it all together.
Thanks,
What
Sarah.
time
Great to see you, Paul.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.